Halo, selamat datang ke program Diploma Profesional Penterjemahan ITBM. Ini ialah khusus TBS10162, Pengenalan Kejurubahasaan. Dan saya Samuel Chu, pengajar untuk khusus ini. Seperti yang anda sedia maklum, bahagian pengenalan kejurubahasaan akan terbahagi kepada 3 bahagian, iaitu 3 modul. Dan ini ialah modul pertama, iaitu Cognitive Architecture. Sebelum kita menjurus ke bahagian kuliah untuk hari ini, kita akan melihat satu halaman berkenaan tentang penafian. Dan setelah anda membaca bahagian penafian ini, saya akan masuk ke bahagian kuliah. Bahagian kuliah akan dijalankan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Tujuannya adalah buku rujukan untuk kuliah ini adalah dalam bahasa Inggeris dan anda diperlukan untuk membaca sebelum dan selepas kuliah, dan bagi memudahkan anda untuk mengikuti kuliah saya ini, anda harus membaca buku-buku rujukan yang telah saya kongsikan dengan anda semua, dan bagi tujuan untuk anda mengikuti apa yang anda telah baca bersamaan dengan apa yang anda akan dengar dalam kuliah ini, saya akan sampaikan kuliah ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Baiklah, kita teruskan. So, for the first module of TBS10162, we will be looking at the cognitive architecture. So, cognitive or cognition refers to the brain and how our mind works. This is not going to be a philosophical lecture, so many of the aspects of this lecture would be very much about how the brain processes information when you perform your task as an interpreter. So that will be the focus of our lecture, and examples that I'll be using in this lecture would be Malay English, although the principles are the same, because as you know in all your previous learning, I believe that on principium, which is on principles, is what matters in every learning. And therefore, the principles that you will learn and as well as apply from this lecture would be applicable to all languages. So I know some of you are proficient in many languages. You're polyglots. Therefore, the principles that you will learn in this module, it's very much the same that you can apply across all the languages. And when I say all languages, I'm referring to all natural languages, and that would include sign languages. So although the modality is different, because spoken language is a verbal language, it's you hear the sound of the language that's being spoken, versus a audio, versus a visual modality, which is the sign languages. You would be able to apply it across whether it's a spoken or sign language, because the principles are the same. So now let's dive straight into the lecture and see what we have in store for you. So the first part of the lecture will be the act of interpreting itself. And what actually happens in the process of interpreting would be something that's important across your hearing and your listening. So this is going to be the first part, and as the first part of the lecture, we will need to first of all understand the overview of this module. It is going to be for about 2 hours. You feel free to actually pause at any point. The only person who is not able to pause this recording is probably myself, because I'm recording it at one go. But you as a student of this course, feel free to actually pause before each section if you find the aspects that you would like to refer to the reference books that I've given you to actually have further reading, or you would like to kind of fact check, as well as to just let the information sink in before you move on to the next part. That's absolutely fine. So as I mentioned, this is going to be purely bilingual throughout. We will use many examples, mainly English and Malay, and therefore every concept that I'm expounding would be anchored with real-life examples using Malay and English, so that you are able to see how these principles are applied in real-life scenarios. So as I mentioned as well earlier in the very start of this lecture, is that please don't just take this as like something that you just watched, because in all learnings, you need to actually shadow, you need to repeat, and also to be able to see and understand how these principles can be applied when you use it in not just Malay English, but across all the languages that you're familiar with. Right, and the reading has already been uploaded, so please read alongside, or you may read before and after the lecture. And for this module, the outcomes that I would like you to master would be, first of all, understand how when you function or work as an interpreter, you're able to deverbalize under pressure. Deverbalize, which means you're able to tease apart the sentences that you hear, the message that's being conveyed by the speaker or signer, and how you are able to go beyond what is being said to understand the message or the sense of what is being conveyed and to express it in your target language. So what's important in the process of interpreting is that we have limited cognitive ability energy, which is how our brain functions, how we actually process the source language, as well as to reconstruct the source language into the target language. There will be effort that you need, that's required when you listen, when you memorize, and you produced the information. And all this requires some form of coordination. And we will look at a very popular as well as a well-researched model that I'll explain to you as we get into that section. So I will give examples and then some of the traps that you experience when you do Malay English interpreting. And as I mentioned, as I said earlier, please do not take it as these principles are only applicable to English Malay, because the principles are very much applicable to all languages. And as you learn, as you come with me on this lecture, you will know and probably realize that you experience saturation spikes, which means you need to actually process as well as be able to analyze the language that you are listening or that you are seeing, if it's a sign language, and how all this information will require sometimes more effort than others. So now let's look at it in detail, what I would like you to learn from this first module. I know some of you are practitioners, you are translators at least, and you know you have a fair bit amount of techniques in translation. Or some of you may have tried interpreting, maybe at the community level. What is important is that have this in mind when we start this course, which is translation and interpreting both require very different skill sets. Of course, there will be skill sets which are overlapping. There are also some aspects of interpreting which is required of you, which is more, if I may use the term, demanding cognitively because of reasons that I will explain to you. The reason why I would make a claim that interpreting is more demanding in terms of how your brain processes information is because, first of all, translation, as you know, you work on a fixed text. The text is very much, whether it's written or printed, it is not going to change, and you have more time, and that allows you some certain level or degree of flexibility to work on the translation, and you are free to make references, and you are able to revise your translation. However, interpreting works as we see here. It's a transient speech. Transient here means it's something that will happen at a point in time, and you are not given a chance to actually rework your so-called translation when you interpret something from the source language. So, and this is important because apart from the fact that the speech is in real time, you are not able to stop the speaker. Often you do not have time to look up a word, and most often when you do interpreting, you have very little room to actually edit the output that you have spoken or signed. So now memory, it's going to be your best friend because you have very little time to rely on the page that where the text is printed. Although in the last module, we will see how AI is able to support in terms of having speech converted to text, regardless of how speech can be converted to text. The memory of an interpreter is really important, and one crucial aspect is that we know that no matter how good you are, memory is finite, which means it's limited, and memory often your ability to memorize things does fluctuate based on your maybe the focus that you have that morning, how you are feeling, how your body is feeling that day, and also in terms of many other aspects actually, such as the environment that you are in, the overall how taxing the speech is would also affect your ability to memorize. So of course, something which is more complicated would need you to draw more on your ability to memorize compared to something which is of simpler, conversational in nature. All right, so all in all, when you interpret, we need to now, first of all, understand that you're not going to interpret the word itself. That's a very important point. You're not interpreting the word, but you're going to convey the idea when you carry out your job or when you're in the process of interpreting. Okay, as you can see, the core difference here is that text is there. You can always look it up again, but speech is something that is that works in progression with time, and it does not wait. And therefore, in this module, we will have that in mind as we consider the process of interpreting itself. Right now, okay. Let's look at the professional landscape. When we call or say someone is an interpreter, we know interpreting, there are basically 4 modes of interpreting. 4 modes, which means there are 4 usual or typical understanding when you say that you are an interpreter. Because an interpreter can work in what we call a simultaneous situation, simultaneous, or SI, where that's the acronym that most of us would use, is that you work from a booth, and Dr. Astrin will take you to the experience of being in a booth and how you interpret real time. But the concept is that when you do interpreting simultaneous, it is actually real time, and you have about maybe 2 to 4 seconds lag. This is the rule of thumb. Lag means the time between the speech that you hear being spoken and the time that you interpret it. So 2 to 4 seconds is common as usual. Of course, if you are able to hold more information, to retain more information, and you are actually able to have a longer lag time, it is actually is to your advantage, which means you are able to now be able to listen to an entire idea being said before you interpret it into your target language. So all in all, this process of interpreting simultaneously, it is the one that requires the highest cognitive load, which means your brain needs to work very hard compared to the 3 other types of interpreting. And because of that, you need to be very focused, and that's the key point to being a good simultaneous interpreter. Sometimes you will notice that interpreter will close their eyes, or sometimes they will stand up, they will just want to walk a bit, because all this physiological actions helps to actually an interpreter to maintain that high level of focus. This is there's no hard and fast rule to this. Some people just prefer to sit down and look at the speaker. Some people prefer to stand up. Some people prefer to close their eyes. Regardless, this is something that you will learn to see which style or which method fits your physiology. So the second type of interpreting, or second mode of interpreting, is a consecutive. Consecutive is the one that you often see during diplomatic meetings, whereby the interpreter listens and he or she takes notes, and then after the speaker finishes, the interpreter would then deliver the content of the speaker into the target language. That's an important skill that you need for this part, or this type of interpreting, which I will cover in the second module, because note-taking, or the ability to process, to analyze, and to note what is being spoken for like 3 to 5 minutes, and then able to reconstruct that into your target language. It's a skill that you will need to learn. And this is something that we will cover in the second module of this lecture. Not in this module, but the next one. Well, the third one is whispered. Whispered is similar to simultaneous. It's also delivered, same time as the speaker. But this is a bit different in the sense that you will now have the, some people may find it the luxury. Some people may find it very pressuring to actually have it to speak to someone who is probably closer to you in terms of proximity. You whisper to the person, whereby you now sit next to the person and you whisper what's being spoken by the speaker into the target language. Of course, nowadays, there is also the common practice of using what we call a tour guide system, whereby if you have been on a tour, you know that the tour guide will actually have a microphone, and all the people who are on the tour would be able to put on a headphone and listen. So the concept is similar to a whispered interpreting, because you are able to see your audience and you have no booth when you are interpreting. Right? Now, the last one is liaison or bilateral. So these are more short exchanges in meetings, in negotiations, whereby if you serve as a liaison officer, or LO we call them, or you could be a personal assistant to your CEO or your MD. You helped interpret meetings, short exchanges between your boss and another speaker who might not speak the same language as your boss, and then you serve in a capacity as an interpreter to deliver the exchanges in the two languages. All right, these are the 4 modes of interpreting that we have in the field as a professional interpreter. So, first of all, I think what we need to do is to first demystify what an interpreter does. So, the interpreter is most importantly a meaning broker. A meaning broker is that he or she is the one conveying the message, the meaning of what's being said. And this is an important clarification to the misconception that an interpreter is just functioning like a fast bilingual dictionary. Word from one language to another language, like a dictionary. And this is one myth that you need to expunge from your system, because this is not what an interpreter does. You need to understand that you do not interpret the word, but you interpret the meaning. Because although words, we understand it's like a container. Container means it has meaning in it. It has something that the word can encode and decode a meaning to what it means. For example, if I were to say that this is a flask, for example, so we know the word flask will refer to this object that I have in my hand. But now, what's important is that now words only contain, it's a container for the meaning. But what is inside the word is what matters, because what's inside the word is what we call the cargo. And the cargo for the word, now it would be able to encode not just the meaning. For example, it can also encode the intent of the speaker, because the selection of the word itself can encode or convey an intent, and can convey the register. Register means what kind of pattern of the word, of the message is being said. Is it something that is like now, a lecture? This is one type of register. Or it could be a casual register when you speak with your friends. So, and all this will create a different impact or effect in how the word is being spoken or signed. So what we need to know, what we need to understand is that two languages rarely actually share the same container, the same word. So because of that, although you may say that, for example, if I have this a mouse, the tikus, it may contain the same two words, but what is important is inside this word itself is not just the container for the word tikus or mouse, but what is being conveyed when I use the term tikus or mouse, for example. We will get into this as we look at the examples, as why linguists like myself would make the broad claim that there are really rarely two languages that completely share the same containers. So the audience must react when they hear the original speaker. The audience that's listening to you as an interpreter needs to connect with the original speaker, but because he or she doesn't understand the source language, he or she needs to connect with the original speaker through you. And therefore, what you do, your role as an interpreter, is not just sharing the container, the word. No, but you want to share what is in the cargo, what is in the meaning, what is in the intent, the register, and the effect of what's being said. So it's not about the glossary, because glossary are just merely words, just merely the container, but we want to look at what is beyond it when a message is being conveyed by the speaker through you as an interpreter to your audience who's listening to your interpretation. All right? That's why the most important myth that I think many of us in Malaysia, especially who speak at least two languages, will often say that, well, yeah, I know two languages. I can interpret. Well, knowing two languages is the prerequisite to be an interpreter, but it's not sufficient to just know two languages to be called an interpreter. It's a necessary requirement, but it's not a sufficient requirement just by merely knowing two languages. So that's an important point that you need to know. What is necessary and what it is actually more than being able to know two languages is how you can interpret between the languages. All right? So now, in terms of the reframing, we know that it's not about word to word translation, it's not a word to word transfer, but we use the term sense to sense, meaning to meaning, message to message, and words are disposable, which means words can be removed, words can be changed, words can be deprioritized compared to the sense of what is being said. And that is why you need to know as to what differentiates between an interpreter versus someone who knows just two languages. So remember, it is necessary to know at least two languages to be an interpreter, but it's not sufficient to just merely know two languages to be an interpreter. All right, now let us now dive slightly deeper to what was being said. From source language to target language. So two terms that you need to know. One is transcoding, one is deverbalization. Transcoding is just mapping a source word into a target word. I gave you an example earlier. Source word mouse. If the target language is Malay, the target word will be tikus. Source structure survives into the target. If you are transcoding the sentence structure, it is one that the person will be carrying over from the source language into the target language. It is like you just need to remember a lot in terms of how the sentence is formed, but we will know that when you just transcode one language to another, from one language to the other, the production or the information that you convey will be ambiguous, and sometimes the meaning is actually not just wrong, but it's completely reversed from what is being said in the source language. And we know it's not possible to transcode speech which are said or uttered under high speed with which is very dense, and also words which are spoken in an accent that is not familiar to you. Versus now, the second type of, or second route or route to interpreting, it's deverbalization, which is sense-based, information, message-based. So when you convey a message or a meaning from one language to the other, you extract the idea. So let the words dissolve. Let the words just remove the words. Don't think about the words. Think about the idea. What is the speaker trying to say? And then you re-express the idea in your target language. And because we are now not focusing on the structure, on the words that are being said, your memory, your cognition is now able to have the ability to be freer to process the information that's being said. And when you're able to do that, your output of your target language would sound native. Sound native means the your output is how a natural speech is being uttered in that language. All right, and when you deverbalized, you'll be able to be stronger. You'll be able to be resilient when you are performing under stress or load, because there are just less things that you need to focus on. You're not focused on the ideas. Let the words kind of like flow. What you need to do is you need to capture not the words that's flowing, but the idea. You sieve through the idea that's being said. All right, so this is the method that we will be focusing on for this course, and this is also the method that you would be exposed to regardless of which interpreting school you choose to advance your studies in the future. So this method is called the Paris School. All right, now let's look at an example. Let's diagnose what is being said and how this method of transcoding versus the method of deverbalization differ significantly in terms of the quality of the interpretation. Now, let's say you are in a diplomatic meeting, and we say that, okay, let's see, can I just transcode what's being said? So let's say the source language in bahasa Malaysia says that pihak kami mengambil maklum akan kebimbangan yang dibangkitkan oleh rakan sejawat kami. So the literal transcoding would be, in the bottom you see it as maybe, the literal output would be, okay, pihak kami mengambil maklum akan kebimbangan yang dibangkitkan oleh rakan sejawat kami would be our side. Pihak kami takes note, and akan is will, kebimbangan, the worry, yang dibangkitkan, that was raised oleh rakan sejawat kami, by our same work friends. This is very literal, and I believe none of you would do this. But this is just an example to see what it means by having a literal output of what's being said, for example, in a diplomatic meeting. So we know, first of all, that if you want to have it into a complete target language, which is English, for this exact same sentence, you probably have a sentence which would sound something like, we have noted the concerns raised by our counterparts. And the thing that you need to note is that when we talk about mengambil maklum, is to note, to acknowledge. So here it is a transfer of sense. When you talk about mengambil maklum, in English it is to mean to acknowledge or to note. And rakan sejawat, counterparts. So you transfer the sense and not just the morpheme. Morpheme is just the word. And when we transfer the morpheme, you would fall into this trap, this perangkap, which is your interpreting will be literal. And as a matter of fact, if you have this literal output, you are not even considered as an interpreter. All right, now let's look at the next slide. Now, with that diagnosis, to give an example of what it means by transcoding and deverbalization, we will now look at what it means when we have this lag. Lag here means that between what you hear and what you say, there's a span or duration whereby a few seconds or some moment in time would have passed. So simultaneous interpreters speak a few seconds behind a speaker. The typical lag time, or the time between what is being heard and spoken, is between 2 to 4 seconds. And this is the skill that we need to develop because based on research, we know that for Malay English, 2 to 4 seconds is a good enough duration for the interpreter to grasp the sense of what's being said, and it's sufficiently short or long for you to actually retain what's being spoken. So if it's too short of a leg, you will fall into transcoding, whereby you just literally change the word from one language to another and not the idea. It is because the idea it's in itself incomplete when you start to speak immediately what is being said by the speaker. And on the other hand, if you speak too long, or your lag time is too long, what happens is that, as we have mentioned, our memory is finite. If it's too long of a lag, your memory overloads and information will be lost. So the lag time is what we call a sweet spot, an ideal amount of time between what's being heard to you speaking it into your target language. And this is the time where we call a typical lag time. Right, for the Malay language, you all know that, we'll give you an example later, whereby often we need to actually wait a bit more because sometimes the key verb or the negation happens at the end. It's sentence final, we call it in syntax. So longer controlled lag actually is to your advantage. All right, so we will look at how we can manage this lag time when we talk about the memory effort in the fourth part of today's lecture. Okay, now, right, now we shall now look at some of the difficulties as to why we say or claim that Malay English interpreting is genuinely difficult. It is because typologically means typology means the study of different languages, okay, different types of languages, and we know that for English and Malay, it is generally considered hard because of the as examples or reasons that I've noted down here. First of all, it's the affixation, which is the imbuhan. The imbuhan makes the morpheme of Malay more complex because many meanings are encoded in the affixation or the imbuhan. And voice here means whether it's passive or active, and Malay does have a lot of agentless. Agentless means in the passive form, you do not know who is the one who is the doer or of the action. So the agent or the doer, the person who is doing the action, is it's actually removed or dropped from the sentence. Whereas we know English often prefers or leans towards the active subject, whereby we want to know who the subject is compared to the Malay language. And in Malay, the qualifiers sometimes or key verbs often appear sentence final. I'll give you an example. And Malay has a register for politeness, and it has difference. The difference is significant compared to how English encode politeness, at least in terms of the lexicon or the words that are being used. And of course, we know Malay is not a tense. There's no tense in the language because in Malay it is an aspect language. Aspect means the time is contextualized. Whether it's telah or sudah or sedang, these are all encoded with aspect markers and not like in English, whereby there's a tense. For example, he eats, or he ate, or he has eaten, or he is eating. All this is not encoded in Malay, apart from the fact that the there'll be aspect to mark whether it's something that's happening or something that's happened or something that will happen. Right? So this is the typological distance between Malay and English. And these are all important and they're non-trivial things, because you need to have a good awareness in your reading. You may come across a term. You need to have a meta-linguistic awareness. Metalinguistic means you need to know how the language functions across the different languages, and that would give you a good sense and help you to master the nuances and the difficulties, as well as how you can better interpret from one language into your target language. All right, now let's look at this. Let's look at some examples, okay, why I make the claim that typologically English and Malay are quite distinct in terms of how they differ and what are some of the difficulties that interpreters will experience. So the structural differences at a glance. Now, for word order is how sentence is constructed. You can understand it like syntax. So, buku merah yang saya beli semalam itu hilang. The word hilang, okay, it is now sentence final. It's at the end. All right. So the word order is now being interpreted into English. So, buku merah yang saya beli semalam itu hilang. The red book I bought yesterday is missing. Okay, that is good. But let's say if the negation in English, it's in Malay, it's a late negation. For example, saya rasa cadangan itu tidak practical langsung. The negation is comes in late in a sentence. So in English, you would say that I don't think that proposal is practical at all. I don't think that that proposal is practical at all. Okay, so this is how when you transfer from Malay into English, it is one that is because tidak practical. Saya rasa cadangan itu tidak practical langsung. It doesn't in any way, if you just read the beginning of the sentence, you don't see that it actually means I don't think, which is actually a negation, I don't. But this negation in English comes at the sentence initial, which is at the beginning of a sentence, compared to in Malay, because saya rasa cadangan itu tidak practical langsung. Where the tidak, the negation comes later compared to when it appears in natural English utterance. And I mentioned agentless. Agentless means the person is we do not know who the person is. For example, keputusan akan dimaklumkan kemudian. So keputusan akan dimaklumkan kemudian oleh siapa? Who? The who is dropped. There's no agent involved in this. The agent is dropped in this sentence. All right. And so this is a how we can reorder Malay sentences into natural English sentences. All right. Now let's continue. So for this section, an important understanding is that when you understand the sentence or the message that's being conveyed in the sentence, you do not actually focus on the words itself. Because when you understand the meaning of the sentence, only what's important that you need to carry across into your target language is the sense. And the sense, which is the message of what's being said, that is something that can transcend language barriers. All right. Now let's continue. As a recap of part 1, we understand that translation is different from interpreting because speech is transient, which means there's no stopping. You can look up for words in the dictionary, and basically you don't have a second chance. There's no second pass. What you want to focus on when you do interpreting is that you need to look at the message, meaning, which is the sense and not the words. So we are therefore called meaning brokers, and we are definitely not bilingual dictionaries, because it's just too easy to be a bilingual dictionary, but it's more challenging, it's more demanding, and that's why interpreters are better paid, as in terms of when you are asked to do your job well, you you are a meaning broker. And we have also shown example why transcoding fails, why literary, when you translate something in its when you transcode something without understanding, it will lead to failure of how your message is being understood. And therefore, the only way to create a most effective and efficient way of presenting the best interpreting is when you deverbalized what is being said. And towards the end of part one, I've mentioned that there are a lot of differences between Malay and English, and these are differences that you need to be aware of, because this is what we call you have a good meta-linguistic awareness of the two languages. All right, that is part one. Now, we will now zoom into what it means by deverbalization in context of our Malay English, and how when we make a claim that words disappear, what it actually means. All right, so the Paris School is the one that is where the theory of deverbalization was born. So there's some history about it. You can read about it if you are interested. But what is important is that we now know that when you do interpreting, the focus is on the sense. All right, because the claim of this theory is that meaning is grasped and reset and not transcoded. Okay, when you reframe, it actually reframes interpreting as a cognitive act of understanding. So as an interpreter, you understand what's being said, and you deverbalize it into its different sections and convey it into your natural target language. Three aspects of this theory is that you need to first understand, you prioritize the sense over words. So what is transferred is the meaning, not just the lexical items. Lexical item means the words. So deverbalization is real and crucial, because it actually helps you to see that the ability to have the ability to comprehend and to express the message or the sense in a way that is natural in your target language. And what's important is that when you do this, in the process of interpreting, the knowledge, which is what matters, completes the meaning that you want to convey. So in other words, the sense, which is the words, and it is now built upon your world knowledge, and that is your ability to be able to interpret well. That's why an interpreter needs to have a very good and very wide world knowledge, because your sense that you're conveying, it's actually having the words being built upon the message that you have by integrating it into the world knowledge that you have as an interpreter. Okay, the three phases to this model. The first phase is perception. You hear, you listen, and you analyze what is being said by the speaker, and you segment it into sense units, which means the message is chunked into information. And when you have done that, you deverbalize. Deverbalizing means you now let the words just, don't focus on the words, let the words just fall away, but you just hold on to the idea. And this idea now is being fused, which is being parked with the world knowledge that you have. And when you have that being fused together, you're able to re-express by reformulating the idea into the target language in its most natural structure or expression. All right, so this is the 3 phases. So phase 1, let's look at it in depth. Because your auditory perception is that before any meaning, before you can actually decipher what's being said, there is sound. And we say that sound is fragile. Why is sound fragile? Because sound that is carried through speech has depending on the speaker, different accent, speed, and whether the speaker wants to choose one register over the other, and the quality of the sound itself. So some people have voice which are easy to understand or easy, clearer to listen to, but some just have, we call them the audio quality of the voice is poorer, and others will affect the phase 1 of your process of how you process the information as an interpreter. Okay, so perception is something that you take charge of because you can predict, you can segmentize the language, the sentence, and you can group them together. And you're not just listening to the words, you're not just listening to the stream of words, but you can actually be able to make them into segments, or you can group them together. And of course, humans as well as machines, you often sometimes experience mishearing, because the, or sometimes you listen or you hear it as something else, the or the in bohan or the affixed. Crops every day will actually change the meaning completely if you listen to something wrongly. So a good perception or good listening skill gives you the time and also the ability to deverbalize it. And if the audio quality is poor, or you are not able to focus on what's being said, or because the speaker has an accent that you find very difficult to understand, or it could be the speaker, as in the sound system is poor, it will actually affect how you actually, how good you are able to perform your job as an interpreter. All right, as we often hear in the past and also now, we say garbage in, garbage out. If what you listen to is gibberish to you, what you can produce can never exceed what is being said. All right, so protect your perception, protect and work on your ability to listen, regardless of the speaker's accent, speed, or register. Many times audio quality, whether it's in a noisy environment, etc. Are you able to listen, tune in to what's being said? And if you're able to do that, you will have you have fulfilled the first most important requirements of being a good interpreter. So after you have heard what's being said, now you need to deverbalize it, which is the most crucial or the defining moment, because the words you have just heard, split second, and it's gone. But what is being retained is the idea, is the intent of the speaker, and the effect of what is being said. It's not the words. The words, like what I say now, the moment I say it, it is gone. But you retain the idea. And therefore, this is a crucial part. The most defining moment, we call it, is to deverbalize what you have heard. So how we are able to do it is that, for example, if you can paraphrase a sentence seconds later, but not quote in verbatim, is a clear evidence that all of us are able to capture the meaning and use our own words to say it. But most often, we're not able to regurgitate or reset what is being said verbatim, which is word for word. Unless, for example, you're a translator, you have it written down, then yes. But most of the time, we know that when we hear something, we are able to say that again, say again what he said, but we're not able to quote the person verbatim. Okay, and one step further as an interpreter is that you now do not need to be concerned about the form of the source language, because now when you interpret it into the target language, you will have now the flexibility to choose and understand. Because of your understanding of how the target language structure is like, you restructure it into one that is completely natural in your target language. And that is the reason why we say deverbalization, or why deverbalize output sounds. When you're able to deverbalize it, your output will sound native, whereas if you just merely transcoding, your output will definitely not able to match the level of how the sentence would sound natural in your target language. And all in all, to be able to deverbalize well, you need to have a very good and wide as well as deep world knowledge. Your general knowledge of what's happening in the world, and your subject matter expertise. For example, if you are from a finance background, or if you are a scientist, a physicist, like myself, we are able to perform deverbalization better, because if you, for example, give a sentence about entropy or thermodynamics, for example, person who has knowledge about what it all means will be able to diffuse, able to convey the information clearer, because the person already know what is being said. Okay, so the test of whether you're transcoding or deverbalization is in this. If you are still quoting the source words word for word, you have not yet deverbalized what is being said. And deverbalization is crucial for an interpreter. So now, what does pure sense means? When sense arrives in chunks, we talk about chunking, whereby you're able to segmentize the information. We're not looking at single words, but we are looking at a cluster of words that carries a complete idea. It can be a phrase, it can be a clause, sentence, or the idea could be packed in an entire sentence. But that's not the crucial part. The crucial part is that what we want to see is the meaning that's being conveyed, that's being carried. Remember the cargo that's inside the container, which is the words. So if you interpret by unit, you release each unit or each segment before the next segment comes in, whereby you interpret one segment of the sense or information before you work on the next sense. Because if you hold too many of this, if you try to overload your memory with multiple layers or multiple sense or information or meaning, you will not be able to actually interpret well, because the brain simply overloads. So the skill, the technique is your ability to actually know where each sense or each meaning, where the boundaries are. And that is what we call the heart or the core of the segmentation. We have given you example. I have given you example earlier that verbs appear in later compared to English, and it is important for you when you listen to a sentence in Malay that's being spoken by the speaker, and wait to see the verb, because the verb is an important part of a sentence, and also the negation, the tidak, okay, often appears later in a sentence compared to English, as I've shown you earlier in the previous slides. All right, so remember, you hold the unit, you don't focus on the word. You grasp the idea, not the sound, not the word. All right, and the more you're able to capture the meaning, the sense, the more capacity your brain has the freedom to actually work on other aspects of interpreting. For example, by working on your intonation, by working on your aesthetics of how you produce the language. Okay, the third phase is re-expression. So you re-say the idea as how a native speaker would say it. You say it fluently. That is very important. If you have the ability as a native speaker, you would probably be able to speak it idiomatically. And as a native speaker, even if you're not a native speaker, you have to speak it completely. All right, because these are the most important requirements of an interpreter, where you're able to follow the target language's grammar, you're able to preserve the intent and register of the speaker, as well as you are able to now speak what is being and what is being omitted. Because, like, for example, the tenses or the articles, it just doesn't appear in Malay, at least not explicitly. The articles is like or the, and all these are articles which we know it's not encoded explicitly in Malay, but it is one of the grammatical rules of English. And we are able to now free ourselves of overloading your brain or your mind, processing what's being said. You are able now to monitor your own output for the meaning or sense. And we know that if a re-expression fails, it's because we are, or the interpreter is not able to completely deverbalize. The breakdown in re-expression into a natural target language is because the second phase, which is deverbalization, has failed or it's incomplete. All right. So remember, when you convey an idea, you have to be loyal. We call it fidelity to the idea. You need to be loyal to the target of what's being intended by the speaker. And this is only achieved when you're not looking at merely the source language words, but understanding the sense of what's being said by the speaker that you are interpreting for. As I mentioned, and I also have emphasized, and I would like to once again make it very clear to you, if you want to be a good interpreter, you need to have a very wide knowledge of different fields, different topics, because when you want to build your sense, it has to be upon a knowledge base that is big enough, wide enough, deep enough to carry all the sense across. All right? So sense is just meaning in the language, linguistic meaning. When you want to do your preparation, when you want to prepare yourself as an interpreter, you know you need to actually work on a lot of background information. And if you have what we call the domain knowledge, as I mentioned, if you are familiar with the domain of finance or computing or philosophy or history, that's the domain knowledge that you're able to retrieve and call upon to build your sense. So when we talk about subject preparation, it's something really not optional. It's really an important part for you to be able to comprehend what is being said and also to speak something that makes sense to the listeners. All right, and for this we will just this is the basic foundation that I want to highlight. We will now, because of technology, be able to actually draw upon some um, tools that are able to help you better prepare yourself when you do interpreting. All right. So, in conclusion, for what it means to carry a meaning across is that your sense is basically what you say in the target language, which is build it upon the knowledge that you already have in that particular domain. And every interpreter needs to be well versed in the subject matter before you even consider yourself an interpreter, and before you even step into the booth to start interpreting. Right. Now, give you an example of deverbalization. Deverbalization. So let's say the source text is this. So rancangan pembangunan ekonomi madani ini telah dipersetujui oleh pihak kami setelah pertimbangan yang teliti. So when you chunk it and you make sense of it, when you deverbalize it of what you have heard, which is the source, the auditory, what you have heard, let's say it's complete. This is what you have heard completely. You want to deverbalize it to make it into chunks of information or sense. So we understand that what it means by this particular sentence is that it has been looked at. The person or we have looked at it carefully. And the persetujui here, it means that we are the ones who have agreed, because we are looking back at who is the one who is agreeing to this Madani economy, all right, or economy Madani. And what the sentence is trying to convey is that it is now approved. So this entire sentence in Malay, if you deverbalize it, you understand it as, first of all, the rancangan pembangunan economy has been looked at carefully, and who are the ones who have agreed to it are the people who have looked at it carefully, and ultimately, after looking at it carefully, what it is trying to say in the sentence is that this policy is now, or this plan is now approved. So when you re-express this entire sentence from Malay into English, you would have an outcome like this, which is, after careful consideration, we have approved the Civil Economy Development Plan. All right? Because when you restructure it, when you re-express it into English, that is natural, the sentence would be close to what you see in number 3, which is the target re-expression. All right. All right. Now, this is important as you see how we can work on the various examples of what we have explained to you, or what I've shared with you at the very beginning of at the section prior to this example. Now, the second example, I will not speak. I will let you look at it and spend a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes, to see how this example B utilizes the principle of deverbalization. All right. If you need a bit more time, please pause and look at it. But actually, I've already given you more than enough time to understand this example. But if you do need more time, feel free to pause. So let's look at example C. Again, I will not say anything. I would like you to just look at it and understand what's being said. Okay, let's move on. One more example of what it means by sense transfer. All right, feel free to pause if you need more time. Another example. Okay, I will give you many examples because I want you to just internalize what you have heard in this lecture. So let's say you experience rapid fire, which is very fast. For example, in the news, when you have news reporting, it's very quick. Fiscal report, also you know that when our Prime Minister or our Finance Minister delivers the budget, it's also very quick because it's reading. How you're able to sense transfer when the delivery is very rapid. Similarly, apart from fiscal documents, legal documents as in legal speeches are also very quick, not just in the parliament, but also if you were to interpret at the court. All right. Now, after the examples, after you have seen all the examples and have an understanding of what it means, I want to come back and ask you this. When you did the interpreting, or when you look at the examples, did deverbalization happen? If it did, you will know that if it fails, you know that the output language or the output of the target language mirrors the source word order. And we know English and Malay do not share the same word order, at least when you are conveying a sentence when you convey the sentence naturally. Okay? Because if it fails, you know that some oddity or non-native expressions will appear. Or it will fail if you actually quote the source verbatim. And deverbalization did not happen if you have a long pause because you're just trying to find a word that matches the source word. And you know that deverbalization did not happen if your audience or your listeners look puzzled, look having difficulty to decipher what you have said. And we know that deverbalization has succeeded is when your output is very natural. You're able to recall the idea of what's being said. If you're not able to recall the idea, means you have not understood. You have not deverbalized the source. You are able to deverbalize your register, which is the way it's being intended to be said. It's preserved. Your flow is very natural. And the lag time is always consistent. If it's 2 to 4 seconds, consistently that. It will not be sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And your ability to deverbalize will be proven when your listeners are able to react as though they are listening to the speaker himself or herself. Okay, this is what it means if you have successfully deverbalized when you interpret. A quick checklist for you. A very quick checklist. I'll run this every time when you do a recording of your interpreting. I highly advise and recommend for new interpreters to record your interpretation, because for you to reevaluate yourself, reassess your interpreting, you need to have recording. When you record what you have, how you have interpreted, check for this. Check for whether you actually waited for the full sense unit to be completely uttered before you start speaking. Are you able to paraphrase the idea without merely having to rely on the source words? Is your target language grammatical? Is the intent of the speaker, the register, is being preserved, or you're just merely saying the words that have been spoken? And if you are, when you stalled or when you are stuck, was it because a knowledge gap, because you couldn't understand what was being spoken, or is it because it was due to your language gap, whereby you do not know what the equivalent of the word is in your target language? Right, this is a checklist for you to always come back to do a self-re-evaluation when you listen to your own recording. So, a summary of what deverbalization means. Remember production, you deverbalized and then you re-expressed. This is the three phases of interpreting. When you're able to deverbalize, the words dissolve, you keep the meaning, you keep the idea, but not the words. And sense can only be conveyed accurately when you have the words paired with the knowledge that you have of the subject matter, or the domain knowledge, we call it. And when you re-express, you are able to convey the sentences in what we call natural, native expression of that language, whereby you actually not only follow the target's grammar, but you are able to also capture the nuances in the target language by completely discarding the grammatical structure of the source language. Okay, let's enter into part 3, which are some of the examples that we will look into, being particular, especially when we look at Malay and English interpreting. We know the Malay voice system. Malay voice system means ayat aktif dan ayat pasif. Right? We know by studying the corpus that Malay generally uses passive sentence construction more freely and more frequently than English, and in more flavors, whereby it is more the different ways of how the Malay language uses the passive form. Because we know, for example, the verb being preceded by the imbuhan di, you can have a oleh. The oleh is not obligatory, because it can be there, it can also be absent. Okay, this is what we call the canonical. Canonical means the typical agent passive sentence construction in Malay. You can also have the structure whereby the passive is object fronting. Object fronting means, for example, surat itu saya hantar, or surat itu saya hantar semalam. So this is the object is the surat itu, but it's now being fronted in the sentence. Third, The imbuhan ter can be, it can be accidental or habilitative, which means like something that you, in the sentence example, tertinggal or terbuat or terguna. Okay, kena can also be a passive sentence construction in English, in Malay, and each of these passive construction maps to a different active English construction. So this is the passive form in Malay that you need to be aware of. So both instincts, instinct copies it as both instinct, which means that you will, if you just listen to it, the output is, if you just have it like in its Malay construction, and you just thought of, okay, I'll just translate directly when I'm in the booth to how it should be in English. The output in the target language, which is in English, is often very weak, and it often creates a certain form of ambiguity. All right, because as I mentioned, Malay is an aspect language, aspect marking language, which means there's no tense. It uses the word telah to signal completeness, something that's completed, which is in English can be encoded or can be expressed with present, perfect, or simple past. When it's di and oleh something, the agent or the person who's doing it, it's at the back, but in English, often the preference is to make the doer or the agent in front as an active sentence. By promoting the agent to subject, use an active, confident statement in English. And if you reserve the English passive, you reserve the English passive only when the agent is unknown or when it's deliberate that you want to drop the doer or the agent. So now you understand when you interpret a sentence that appears to be passive, that is passive in Malay, the default action that you do when you interpret it into English is to know who the doer is, which is the agent, and make the agent the subject. In other words, make the sentence and turn it from passive into an active construction. All right, passive is often only reserved when the doer is deliberately omitted in the sentence. Okay, so why in English the natural way of expressing it is having it in the active voice, because in diplomacy and also in business, the active voice signals the agency who is doing it, and also signals the ownership, which is the person who's saying it takes ownership of what's being said, and it actually helps to resolve the meaning. For example, when it's in English, you have approve. It's like one that you with signals commitment. Compared to it has been approved, it actually evades the ownership or evades who actually, or it actually softens the ownership as well as the impact of the sentence itself. So active English is also shorter, therefore it's preferred, because when it's shorter, it saves your production effort. And for an English listener, when they pause means when they listen to a sentence that's spoken very quick, the construction, the word order that is subject, verb, object, it's more easily parsed and understood compared to a sentence which is in the passive voice. All right. So because also naturally English, over passive English, for a native speaker, it reads as bureaucratic or it reads as evasive. And if you are a leader speaking in a bilateral meeting, for example, it will give a wrong impression, or it is actually a wrong register for the leader to be speaking with using excessive passive voice in their speech when you interpret it for him or her. Okay, so remember, Malay passive is only kept or is only preserved when you want to deliberately omit the agent or the person who is doing it. All right, so remember this. Active in English is a sense of agency. Agency here means who is doing it, the agent, and passive creates some kind of a distance. Therefore, if you choose to preserve the passive voice, it has to match the speaker's intent. If you choose to use active voice, it's also because you know this is what's being that's what is intended by the speaker. That ultimately, it's more of the speaker's intent that you are considering, not the word order or the syntax. In Malay, because it's passive, you want to preserve the passive voice when you interpret it into English. Okay. So how do you depassivize? How do you depassive the sentence in Malay into English? First of all, you need to know where the agent is. Agent who's the speaker. Move the speaker to the front, which is you promote it as to be in the subject position of the sentence, and then you need to know what the aspect is and provide the equivalent in English, whereby it's expressed in the tense of the sentence in English. All right. Now, give you an example. Look at this when it's in a diplomatic meeting. So the passive sentence here is uses the verb ditolak. All right. So this one, all right, the agent is the majority ahli mesyuarat, which is the majority of the members. It's now being moved to the front. It's being moved to its subject position in English, because now in English, a majority of members rejected the proposal. And that's when the passive sentence in Malay is now moved or changed into an active sentence. Because if you were to use the default equivalent, which is the berangkap, which is when you say the proposal was rejected by the majority of members, yes, this is maintaining the passive structure of the Malay language, yet we know that a more impactful, a better rendering of this sentence would be a majority of members rejected the proposal. Okay, now let's look at the next example. This one is for a legal or commercial context, whereby we see how contract ini boleh ditamatkan oleh mana-mana pihak dengan notis 30 hari. So again, it's a passive sentence. When we render it into native English expression, is that you would say it in how the sentence is interpreted for you, which is either party may terminate this contract on 30 days notice instead of using the passive construction. Okay, two more examples for you to consider. Let me just let you read this as to how passive construction in English, in Malay, when you render it into English, natural native sounding English, this is how it would be spoken. All right. So you can see the one on the left is the English passive is kept because the agent is unknown. When the agent is unknown, or if it's irrelevant, there is no possibility of moving the agent to the subject position of the sentence. And another example is when it's a legal statement. the sentence remains or stays passive because the point here is not the law doing the job. It's not, because the law is not a doer. It is the point of what is being said. So you need to be clear when you retain the passive construction, when you interpret a Malay sentence into English, and when would be natural to change a passive sentence into active when you render a Malay sentence into English. This is very much a interpreting technique. You may have another opinion when you do translation, but these are considerations when I talk about interpreting. As I mentioned earlier, interpreting, the listener need to parse, P-A-R-S-E, need to understand what you say, and it's a sentence that they cannot reread the sentence. So for an English listener, for a native speaker, when a sentence is in English, it should be in the active voice. For the listener to be able to understand and parse the meaning of your sentence with the least cognitive effort. All right, more examples for you to consider across different domains. You have 2 minutes to look at it. Right. Next. Now, looking at the imbuhan the ambiguity that you can create when it has the affix the. Right. We know what it means in Malay, and we know that the can mean accidental, like tertinggal, or it can be resultative, like terguna. So in English forces a choice. The Malay leaves open. You need to pick from the sense, not the form, which is the meaning that the imbuhan or the affix the wants to encode or mean in Malay. So if there's a certain form of ambiguity, of uncertainty, you will be, if you're not able to tell, you have to read the context. That's why you're able to work better compared to an AI, because you have context of what's being said. All right. What is important is that when you see the word ter, we do not default to the literal accidental. When we think ter, it's always something that's accidental. If you have this default in your mind when you interpret, you will often encounter the problem of what we call misinterpretation. Let's see. Give you an example what I mean when I say this. Allow you to read this and see what the affix or imbuhan ter actually mean in these two sentences. All right. So the imbuhan ter in Malay, let's not oversimplify thinking that it's always accidental. Okay, now, so after we have had this and read and understood how passive form in Malay could form a trap for interpreters, we see that we need to always, again, deverbalize, because when you deverbalize, you avoid the literal passive, You now are able to level up your ability as an interpreter by looking at how it should be re-expressed when you interpret it, when you interpret something from Malay into English. Okay? So this is what is important for you to understand. Now, a quick checklist like the previous section. Always remember, this helps you when you do the checklist, whether it's a recording or when you do interpretation. Remember this 5 points. Whether the agent, can I promote it to subject? Does the speaker want to sound decisive or he wants to sound distant? Have I supplied the right tense, which the sentence in Malay implies? Is it a legal passive, or should I stay passive? That should stay passive, or is my active version shorter, whereby it's always good to produce something shorter because it is not just saving your production effort, it is also saving the effort of your listener who's listening to your interpretation. Okay, so remember this as a quick recap of part 3. So default is active when you're interpreting from Malay into English. You can keep passive under certain conditions. When you interpret that passive Malay sentences into English, remember to supply the right tense, and often be careful when you encounter ter, because it actually is not always accidental. Okay? Now, part 4 of this module 1. So let's look at the energy budget. Energy budget here means how do you actually use your energy in the most efficient manner. I've mentioned, right? This model gives you the understanding of not just something that, of course, you intuitively feel so, but now this model puts it into a structure of how you should understand. You know that when you interpret, our mental processing capacity is finite. All right. So there are some non-automatic operations which compete for that pool of simultaneously, because a lot of thinking is involved and many a times it's not automated. You need to process it, and that competes for your mental processing capacity. And of course, intuitively and logically, if the demand exceeds your ability, you will not be able to perform well. And performing well would have a devastating effect. For example, when you are not able to render the sentence well, you lose other abilities that will make you an effective interpreter, like the ability to predict. All right. So this model that we will be explaining is it gives you the explanation as to how the different that explains errors when your resourced, which is the ability to process, fails. And this is not something. It's not because of carelessness, but it's because of the finite ability of your mental processing capacity is being exceeded. All right. Now let's look. Because of the finite capacity of the brain, you now need to budget how you actually use the finite pool of mental capacity to meet the different competing demands. So if it's something that's automated, you do not need any. Some automated tasks are what we call nearly free of the need to use your brain, cognitive processing power, while the non-automatic ones are the one that will actually require a lot of your brain processed. For example, we talk about when you walk, that's automatic, but you analyze a very dense Malay clause, it's not. And when something is a non-automatic function or operation, it will always draw on your limited attention that you have. Therefore, when we interpret, we need to listen, we need to remember, we need to produce, we need to coordinate different the structure. All these things happened at once, and each can spike, meaning it suddenly has the higher demand, and this can be because the sentence that's being spoken by the speaker, he has an accent that you are not familiar with, or he speaks or says a number that is that you need to remember, especially if it has a decimal point, for example, or decimal place, and if the sentence is very long, all this will actually cause a spike in your processing the need or the demand for your processing ability. So what's important is that when you process information, you need to actually be able to allocate it in a way that you have enough spare to process when a spike happens. All right. So let's continue with this model. As I mentioned, this model actually looks at the 4 aspects of your efforts. One is your listening and the analysis, how you retain it in your memory, how you produce it, and how you coordinate, which means how you divide your attention between the first three efforts, which is listening, memory, and production. So when you listened, so this is where everything begins. We have said this earlier. It covers how you segmentize, how you perceive information, and this effort will spike if you are listening to a very quick speech that's full of jargon, so the audio is poor. And we have also talked about Malay sentence construction, that the verbs negations appear late in the sentence. Also strong subject perhaps lowers kind of your listening by making input predictable. So having it in strong subject actually helps your input more predictable if it's an active voice. But when it's not, you sometimes may mishear. When your listening is not, it's not functioning, it is in the capacity that it should be, you sometimes mishear the affixes, and if that happens, your entire production will collapse. So short-term memory is how you store the information that you have heard. Remember, names and numbers all require a lot of memory, but we know that there's a technique to help you have better short-term memory, which is to deverbalize. And if your memory is overloaded, what happens is that you will have a lot of information that is dropped or omitted. But not to be overly, at this point in time, overly dependent on AI. But in Module 3, we will see how AI can actually help you in this aspect of effort, which is memory retention. Next, so remember, after memory retention is the production, how you actually produce the source language into your target language. I've already set the inclination whereby of English sentences, and to listen to an English sentence, active is preferred, and it's actually leaner. Leaner means it's easier to parse and easier to process. And when we have the production, it's overly, when your production requires an over demand of your effort, it will lead to many what we call self-repair or false starts, whereby you said something and you have to repeat or restructure your sentence. How do you actually help with your production in terms of the effort? You have a glossary, and this glossary can be effectively organized and produced using AI, which we'll be looking at when we go into the third module of this lecture. All right, so we can lower the production effort by ensuring that a sentence it's natural in the target language. Have your terms ready, and if it's from Malay into English, prefer active voice. And because when you are able to lower your production effort, your output, of course, will not just be leaner, it will also be lighter in terms of the brain processing requirement, how much brain power you need to produce a good sentence in your target language. All right. So C, effort or coordination. So remember, it's the meta effort, which means it's the one that will now coordinates all the first three aspects of your of the effort that's required to produce your target language. All right. In order to coordinate the first three efforts, coordination itself requires effort. So if you are tired or fatigued, it will help you. That's why when you are towards the end of your sentence or of the session on the day, sometimes is late sessions sometimes feel less coordinated because you are already tired or you experience fatigue. All right. So we have methods to reduce the effort that's required. We have, of course, team relays, whereby we have more than one interpreter in the booth. We actually rotate. We will talk about this. And also Dr. Ashwin will show you examples of how you rotate your interpreting between you and your partner, maybe every 15 to 20 minutes, to actually conserve the energy that's required, therefore optimizing your energy for all the efforts required to produce a good interpreting. Okay, so you can understand C like the conductor of an orchestra, whereby it actually helps to put everything together. And if you do not have the ability or the energy to coordinate the first three efforts, the the interpreting process will just fall apart, because between production and between how you listened, okay, we're all now listening, and then your memory retention and production will just collide or clash. So this is an equation for those who like mathematics, like myself. Your capacity, which is your ability to process all these things, is equivalent to all this add up together. And this 4 letters of the alphabet refers to listening, memory retention, production, and coordination. I like this little quote for you to internalize what you have just heard. This tightrope hypothesis is that the interpreting lives on the tightrope, whereby the total demand constantly flirts with the limit of available capacity. And the capacity means the ability of your brain to process all this information, all these different aspects of interpreting. Right. Let's move on towards the end of the lecture. So now, saturation and a failure would actually cascade, which means if one thing falls, if one effort you're not able to budget enough capacity for one of the efforts, and if one is affected, it will cascade to a complete failure to your output when you interpret. Okay, so this is because you experience spikes, and spikes I've mentioned, it's when we listen to something that's more dense in terms of the information, or a speech that's very quick, or it's just basically at the end of the day where you're tired. So that these are all things that will impact how you actually budget your effort. Okay, so ensure what are the triggers that will lead to the saturation of efforts. These are things that I will mention here, but all these are things that I want you to know that will lead to spikes. But what is important is that I want to let you know that these are things that will trigger saturation, trigger the efforts that's required, but these are also things that now with AI, which we will cover in Module 3, be able to actually provide you some respite or some support and help when we reach Module 3. And that's also the reason why we cover this now, so that you understand what are the limitations, what are the triggers of saturation, and with this clearly understood, you will know why AI would then be an important or very useful partner for you to be a better interpreter. Okay, we have mentioned here, these are some of the things that will lead to spikes because of the density of the Malay sentence itself. Every imbuhan or a fixation can mean something that's different. All right, and how you listened, the difficulty of listening to something that's being spoken would also lead to more effort required. So let me just give you an example of acoustic confusion under load. This is what it means when you have poor audio quality. Sometimes you miss something is misheard, the syllable is flipped, and this is what would happen. So how do you overcome this? If you have the ability of a good wide domain knowledge, you are able to anticipate based on the context. Okay. Let's look at the next one. So when you have a fix, which is imbuhan, what are the situations that will lead you to have a breakdown in terms of your output? Okay. These are examples from Malay into English that I want you to be familiar with, and it can be understood vice versa. So part 4, a quick recap. Capacity, it's a combination of these 4 efforts. It's finite. If the capacity is more than demand, it's you are now on a tightrope, like walking on a tightrope. And if there are spikes, it will lead to a cascading effect that will cause the failure to interpret well. And these are some of the reasons why when you do Malay into English or from any language, be familiar with what are the things within the language that may lead to energy deficit, or what are the aspects of the language when you interpret between the 2 languages, what are the things that you should be cognizant of when you budget your energy. All right. So part 5, after all the things that we have talked about, we will talk about how to cope with the situation. Just look, okay, how you cope with the situation and how you actually be able to use tactics to ensure that the demand that of the interpretation is within the capacity, within your capacity. And that differs from a person, from individuals. So the coping technique or coping tactics is you anticipate, you predict what is to be said, you're able to segmentize what is being said to ensure the message is what you are focusing on, ensure you have a good lag time, because lag time is important to know whether the language that you are interpreting from has a late verb or late negation. And of course, when you monitor yourself, you're able to be aware of your output. Okay, these are all the coping tactics. So I've mentioned anticipation, and you predict, and all this. It's an ability that you develop based on the foundation that you have a good domain knowledge, and you're able to predict and anticipate better when you are more familiar with the topic. All right. Then also, of course, the more familiar you are, the more proficient you are in the particular languages, you are able to predict better. Okay, and these are tactics or skills that you need to have to ensure you are able to budget and use your capacity let me repeat, you're able to optimize your capacity by having the least effort to produce the best results. Okay, let's say, I give you an example here for you to quickly read. How do you deal with, how do you now use the effort by being able to also not just predict, by deverbalizing, because of your domain knowledge, you are able to re-express the source language with the least effort when you are interpreting. Okay, so I would like to have this page for you to look at some of the pitfalls and how do you overcome all these pitfalls. Remember not to speak too soon. Wait for the sense unit to be clear to you before you interpret. Don't try to remember a whole for too long because that will lead to memory overload. So ensure that you chunk them into smaller segments and have it produce, say it, release it, speak it, so that you can allow your brain to capture and hold to the next piece of information. And because of the sentence construction in Malay, don't be overly concerned to maintain the passive construction, because in English you have it in active, would not just help you as an interpreter, it will help the listener understand better. Okay, so how do you actually put in the tense for English? Is by looking at the aspect markers in Malay. And how do you actually prevent freezing on a very dense technical term is have the glossary, have the terminology in front of you, and this would be one that we will cover in detail when we look at how you become an augmented interpreter, which is depending on to leverage on technology to assist you. Okay, so now module 1, what I want you to master in this module is this. After you have heard this, after you have listened and feel that you are confident of what you have understood and learned in this module, do this checklist to ensure that you have a complete understanding of what is being taught in this module. Okay, not to worry, all this will be passed to you, and we will have all this PowerPoint for you to look at this and ensure that you now have a good understanding and also a mastery of Module 1. Because in a week's time, we will move on to the second module, and I would like you all to actually have a good mastery of Module 1 prior to moving to Module 2. Okay, now this is the page. I want you to, it's a required reading, and please read and be prepared for next week. Okay, so I look forward to meeting you all. I mean, I hope you look forward to meeting me. I can't see you, but let's do that. And this is the last slide we have. So the end of the module, we want to now ensure that you have all the tools, all the understanding with the examples to internalize what you have heard, to build a robust cognitive architecture for you to be a good interpreter. All right, so now be prepared for the next week's module, and wishing you all the best in your learning, and see you next week.